Hey, Andy Poli here. I wanted to share a repair that we recently did on a Toyota RAV4 2004 in order to clear a diagnostic trouble code of P2238. The primary symptom was a set of indicator lights on the dashboard. So we connected a diagnostic tool to the car in order to read out the codes and get a feeling for what the problem was. The reader displayed multiple codes. A group of them began with P04, and these are some emission-related codes. And then there was a code P2238, and this relates to the air-fuel mixture, which affects not only the emissions, but also the engine longevity and the fuel economy. So we wanted to deal with this issue first. Fortunately, our reader is telling us not only the code for the problem, but also gives us a text description. And it tells us that there's an oxygen sensor that has a control circuit problem, and it tells us bank 1, sensor 1. In this car, this is the air fuel sensor that threads into the exhaust manifold. For this or other problems, you'll often want to look up the code online and see what the possible causes are. Here, our possible causes are a bad sensor or some kind of a wiring problem, either the problem with the cable itself or the connector. Consider the possibility that there is a connector or cable problem by inspecting them carefully. But if you don't see any sort of fraying or melting, it's pretty unlikely. Okay, so we're moving on to the replacement now. This is a job that usually costs about $400 at a shop. A top quality replacement part is about $120. There are two ways you can go about replacing the sensor. If you have a special oxygen sensor wrench, you can go ahead and remove the sensor without even removing the heat shield. I didn't have this at my disposal, so instead I removed the 4 bolts that hold the heat shield on, which made the oxygen sensor accessible so that I could remove it with the standard 7/8 inch wrench. So the essential thing that we need to take care of is getting the bolts off of this exhaust heat shield. And you want to do it without breaking the bolts. And I've had a lot of trouble with this in my life. Until a friend of mine pointed out that it's really not about twisting the bolt head, it's about cracking the rust that is formed between the bolt and whatever it's screwed into. So there's a trick to that, and there's 2 parts to it. One is that you have to get some penetrant in there, and all penetrants are not equal. And one of the best ones that you can get is Croyle. The second thing is that in order to crack the rust that exists between the bolt and what it's screwed into, you need to tap on, you need some kind of an impact to drive that crack through. Now, professionals have impact tools that do this, but an amateur can get the same effect just by pounding on the wrench. It's not great for the wrench, but it gets the job done. So these top 2 bolts, or actually a bolt and a nut, are fairly easy to get off, but there's 2 bolts down below that are harder to get at. It's harder to get the penetrant in there, and it's harder to get a wrench on the bolts. So just spraying some of this penetrant onto the bolt head for these lower bolts was not enough. In order to really get the penetrant on the threads, I had to saturate a Q-tip and then reach around the back of the heat shield and dab it on. So this freed one of the bolts immediately. The other bolt, though, its head was rounded, and the 12-point box end wrench was slipping off. So we had to go and buy a 6-point box end wrench, and once we did, it was very easy to get the bolt off. Okay, so all 4 bolts are out, and the heat shield is loose. There's just one more thing we need to do before we can remove the heat shield, and that's disconnect the oxygen sensor cable at the connector. To unplug this connector, you grab on the light gray part of the body in the back. There's a thumb lever. You push in the thumb lever, and then you pull the dark gray part of the sensor connector out of it. As the cars age, this becomes more difficult to do. So one way to get around it is when you open up that lever by pushing with your thumb, you can put a screwdriver in there to hold the detent from re-engaging so that you can put all your effort into pulling the connectors apart. So now you can remove the heat shield, and this exposes the oxygen sensor. A little squirt of penetrant and a couple of taps on a 7/8 inch wrench, and the oxygen sensor comes loose. Gather up the rest of the cable and twist the whole sensor in the cable out by hand. And there we are, our old oxygen sensor has been removed and we're ready to put in the new one. So here's the new sensor. Before we install it though, we're going to need to put a little bit of anti-seize compound on the threads. This will ensure that if we need to remove it later in another 200,000 miles, that we'll be able to get it out. So to reinstall the sensor, we just get control of the cable and go ahead and spin the sensor by hand into place, finger tight, and then put your 7/8 inch wrench on there and tighten down the sensor to about 30 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, now go ahead and thread the sensor cable through the heat shield, replace the fasteners to secure it, plug the sensor cable back into its connector, and as the last step, strap the sensor cable back to the radiator hose like it was when you started. The next thing we did was reconnect the diagnostic reader and cleared the codes. Now after you reset the codes, you'll need to drive the car long enough to reset all of the readiness conditions. These are conditions the car has to go through before it will even allow diagnostic codes to be triggered. After making sure that the readiness conditions were satisfied, we were satisfied to see that our code P2238 didn't return. We also were able to watch the oxygen sensor in action, responding to acceleration and deacceleration, and we're satisfied that the problem was completely solved. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. That way you'll be notified when any new videos are released. Thanks for visiting.